My name is Olive Holden, and I am 39 years old. To the world, I am a colonel. To my family, I am an unpaid maid. And for most of my adult life, my family has treated me like a burden. Standing in the middle of the noisy LAX International Terminal, my brother Ethan threw a crumpled plane ticket at my chest. Economy middle seat, right next to the toilet, sis. Try to enjoy it. He smirked, his other hand waving the 2 first-class tickets for him and our parents. My mother didn't even look at me. She just shoved her heavy Louis Vuitton suitcase toward me. Take this, Olive, don't scratch it, and walk a little distance away. Your sloppy appearance is ruining the family image. They didn't know that inside the pocket of my old hoodie wasn't a plane ticket, but the highest-level military identification card. They thought I would just lower my head and shuffle to the back of the plane like always. But they didn't know that in just 5 minutes, this entire airport would be standing at attention to salute me, including them. Let me know what state you are listening from down in the comments. And hit subscribe right now if you believe that. Sometimes the best revenge isn't words, but a display of absolute power. The air inside LAX always smells the same. A stale mixture of floor wax, jet fuel, and the nervous sweat of thousands of people trying to be somewhere else. But right now, the only thing I could smell was Ethan's cologne. It was expensive, aggressive, and applied with the subtlety of a chemical weapon. I stood there, acting as a human anchor in the sea of travelers, while the 3 people I called family stood in a loose semicircle, effectively boxing me out. My shoulders burned. I was currently holding 3 large suitcases, my father's hard-shell Samsonite, my mother's precious Louis Vuitton roller, and my own battered duffel bag. Ethan, my 34-year-old baby brother, wasn't holding anything except his iPhone 15 Pro. He was wearing sunglasses indoors. Not because the terminal was bright, but because he thought it made him look important. He was tapping furiously on the screen, his thumb hovering over the post button on Facebook. And posted, Ethan announced, flashing a grin that showed too many teeth. Tagged us at the first-class lounge check-in. Got to let the network know the Holdens are traveling in style. I shifted the weight of the bags, feeling the straps dig into my calloused palms. I craned my neck slightly to see the screen he was showing to Mom. It was a selfie of the 3 of them, Ethan, Mom, and Dad, beaming with their polished veneers. I was standing right next to them when he took it, but in the photo, I was gone, cropped out, erased. Nice picture, I said, my voice dry. Ethan glanced at me over the rim of his sunglasses, his eyes scanning me from head to toe with performative disgust. Yeah, well, I couldn't exactly leave you in the frame, could I, Olive? Look at you. He gestured vaguely at my outfit. I was wearing a pair of faded Levi's that had seen better days and a gray zip-up hoodie I'd bought at Target for $20. My hair was pulled back in a severe, no-nonsense ponytail. It was practical, it was comfortable, and to Ethan, it was a crime against humanity. You look like you're heading to Home Depot to fix a toilet, Ethan sneered. Or like you're about to ask me for spare change. Seriously, Olive, it's embarrassing. We're going to Hawaii, not a homeless shelter. My father, Frank, chimed in. He was adjusting his silk tie, checking his reflection in the glass of the departure board. Leave her alone, son. You know your sister never had the knack for presentation. She's rugged. Like a man. He laughed, a short, dismissive bark of a sound. It's a lost cause. I didn't flinch. I didn't defend myself. Years of training had taught me discipline, but years of living with them had taught me something even more valuable. Silence is a shield. If I told them that these rugged hands had dismantled explosives in Syria, or that this homeless look allowed me to blend into crowds where a man in a silk tie would be a target, they wouldn't understand. They would just ask why I didn't get paid more. Move it, Olive, my mother, Margaret, snapped, snapping her fingers near my face. The priority line is moving. I hefted the bags again, trudging behind them like a pack mule. The crowd was dense today. A businessman in a hurry, distracted by his watch, collided hard with my mother's shoulder. She stumbled slightly, though she didn't fall. Hey, watch it, Mom shrieked, clutching her pearls. The man muttered a quick apology and disappeared into the throng. Mom spun around, her face twisted in a snarl, targeting the only person she ever held accountable. Me. What are you doing standing there like a statue? She hissed, her voice cutting through the ambient noise of the terminal. Why didn't you block him? You're big enough. You saw him coming. I have 3 suitcases in my hands, Mother, I said, my voice steady, betraying none of the heat rising in my chest. Excuses, she spat. Always excuses with you. You're just useless. I don't know why we even paid for your ticket. Paid for my ticket. The irony was so thick I could taste it. I wanted to laugh. I wanted to scream that the only reason they weren't drowning in debt from Dad's heart surgery was because of my money. But I didn't. Instead, I looked down at the boarding pass Ethan had thrown at me earlier. I smoothed out the crinkles against my jeans. Seat 37B, economy, middle seat, back of the plane, right next to the lavatory. I could feel the familiar burn of humiliation, the old sting of being the spare part in the Holden machinery. But then a different voice cut through the noise in my head. It wasn't my mother's shrill complaints or Ethan's mocking laughter. It was a voice forged in mud, sweat, and freezing water. Callous your mind, I thought, reciting the philosophy I lived by. They don't know who you are, and they don't deserve to know. I looked at my family, my mother dusting off her imaginary injuries, my father checking his watch impatiently, my brother preening for his invisible online audience. They looked shiny. They looked successful. But they were soft. They broke under the slightest pressure. I touched the pocket of my hoodie. I could feel the hard plastic edge of my CAC, my common access card with the gold chip. It was heavy with authority. Are you coming or not? Ethan called out, already 10 feet ahead in the priority lane. I'm coming, I whispered. I looked at the crumpled economy ticket in my hand one last time. It wasn't just a piece of paper. It was a symbol. It was exactly like the paper plate I used to eat off of at Thanksgiving. The memory hit me hard, triggered by the sight of that cheap, flimsy paper. The noise of the airport faded, replaced by the clinking of silverware and the cold draft of a dining room in Bakersfield. The memory didn't just wash over me, it hit me like a physical blow, dragging me back 2 years into the past. It was late November. I had just driven 4 hours north from my base to Bakersfield. The drive along the I-5 had been a blur of brown hills, endless semi-trucks, and the kind of exhaustion that seeps into your bone marrow. I had been back on American soil for less than 72 hours. My body was still operating on cobble time, my nerves still vibrating from a deployment that had gone sideways more times than I could count. I hadn't slept a full night in 6 months. I wasn't looking for a parade. I wasn't looking for a medal. I just wanted to sit on a soft couch, eat a hot meal that didn't come out of a plastic pouch, and have my mother look at me and say, I'm glad you're safe. That was the fantasy. The reality was the Holden family driveway. When I pulled up to the house, the windows were glowing with warm, amber light. I could see silhouettes moving inside, laughing. It looked like a Norman Rockwell painting. It looked like a home. But when I killed the engine, the silence that followed was heavy. No one came to the door. No porch light flicked on for me. I dragged my duffel bag up the walkway, the gravel crunching loudly under my combat boots. Boots I hadn't even had time to swap out yet. I turned the knob. It was unlocked. Hello, I called out, stepping into the foyer. The smell hit me first. Sage, roasted turkey, melted butter, and cinnamon. It was the scent of a perfect American Thanksgiving. We're in the dining room, my mother's voice floated out. She didn't sound excited. She sounded like she was announcing the time. You're late, Olive. We started without you. I walked into the dining room, and the scene before me froze my heart. The main dining table was a masterpiece of suburban performance art. Mom had brought out the good china, the one with the gold rim she'd bought at an estate sale. There was a silk tablecloth, crystal wine glasses, and a centerpiece made of fresh autumnal flowers. My father, Frank, sat at one end, swirling a glass of red wine. My mother sat opposite him. And there, in the seat of honor at the head of the table, sat Ethan. He was holding court, gesturing wildly with a fork, his face flushed with wine and self-importance. So I told the investors, Ethan was saying, his voice booming. If you want in on this condo development, the buy-in starts at 50 grand. No exceptions, and they were begging me to take their checks. He stopped when he saw me. Oh, hey sis, nice of you to join the living. Hi Ethan. Mom. Dad. I stood there, awkward in my fatigue uniform, feeling like an intruder in a stranger's house. Well, don't just stand there letting the cold air in, Mom said, not looking up from her plate. Sit down. I moved toward the empty chair next to Dad, but Mom cleared her throat loudly. Not there, Olive. That's for my purse and the extra wine bottles. We didn't think you'd make it in time, so we set you up over there. She pointed a manicured finger toward the corner of the room. There, pushed up against the wall, was a folding card table. It was the kind with the vinyl top that we used for garage sales. It was wobbly, one leg shorter than the others, propped up by a folded magazine. It was set with a paper plate and a red Solo cup. Worst of all, it was positioned directly under the drafty window that Dad had been promising to fix for a decade. I was 37 years old. I was a lieutenant colonel commanding special operations. And I was being sent to the kids' table in my own parents' house. Are you serious? I asked, my voice barely a whisper. Oh, stop making a face, Mom snapped. It's just a seat. Sit down and eat. I sat. The chair was a metal folding chair that was freezing cold against my legs. I looked at the spread of food on the main table. The turkey carcass was picked mostly clean. The bowl of mashed potatoes was scraped low. Pass the turkey, please, I said. Ethan grabbed the platter. Sorry, sis. I think I got the last of the dark meat. You know how much I love the legs. He grinned, grease shining on his chin, and took a bite of a succulent, juicy drumstick. He passed me the platter. All that was left were a few slices of the breast meat. It looked chalky, dry. It had probably been sitting out for an hour. I took a slice. It was like chewing on drywall. When I reached for the gravy boat to add some moisture, it was empty. Mom, is there any more gravy? No, Ethan finished it, she said, dabbing her mouth with a cloth napkin while I stared at my paper one. He's been working so hard on this real estate project. He needs the brain food. It's exhausting work, convincing people to trust you with their money. And what about me? I asked, the words slipping out before I could stop them. I just got back from Afghanistan, Mom. I haven't slept in 2 days. Mom waved her hand dismissively. Oh, please, you're used to that. You eat those… What are they called? MREs? That stuff in plastic bags. Your palate is probably ruined anyway. You wouldn't appreciate the nuance of this seasoning. I put the fork down. The dry turkey felt like a stone in my throat. My hands were trembling slightly under the table, a tremor I had developed after a particularly bad IED explosion near my convoy 3 weeks ago. Did you bring anything? Mom asked suddenly, her eyes lighting up for the first time. What? Gifts. From the duty-free shop, or wherever you were stationed. I saw these beautiful pashmina scarves in a magazine that said they were from that region. I stared at her. I was in a combat zone, Mother. I wasn't shopping. The disappointment on her face was immediate and brutal. Oh, well, that's thoughtful of you. Come home empty-handed after a year away. I came home alive, I said, my voice tightening. Ethan laughed. It was a cruel, braying sound. Calm down, G.I. Jane. Don't go having a flashback on us. We're just trying to have a nice dinner. He took a long swig of wine. So, are you still doing that? Whatever it is you do. Logistics? What is it, basically being a glorified secretary at the airfield? Scheduling flights? I looked at him. I looked at his soft hands, his designer watch, the way he slouched in his chair with entitlement oozing from every pore. I don't schedule flights, Ethan, I said quietly. Right. You fix the planes, or whatever. Look, the point is, it's government work. Fixed income, low ceiling. He turned to Dad. That's why I tell you, Dad, you gotta think bigger. Like me. Dad nodded sagely, looking at Ethan with a mixture of pride and adoration that he had never, not once, directed at me. Your brother is right, Olive. He has a mind for business. He understands leverage. You? Well, you've always been better at following orders. Not everyone is smart enough to be an entrepreneur. Not smart enough, I repeated. I looked down at my plastic plate. I looked at the dry, white meat. I thought about the bank transfer I made every single month. I thought about the entrepreneur brother who was currently leveraging my parents' retirement fund for schemes that never materialized. Well, Dad continued, wiping his mouth, at least you have job security. It's steady, keeps you out of trouble. They talked over me for the rest of the meal. They talked about neighbors I didn't know, TV shows I hadn't seen, and vacations they were planning to take. I sat at the wobbly card table, the wind from the window chilling the sweat on my back, eating cold potatoes. I was invisible. I was a wallet, a pack mule, a disappointment. But as I looked at my father, seeing the slight gray pallor of his skin, I remembered something else. I remembered the phone call from 2 years ago. The panic. The surgery that insurance wouldn't fully cover. They called me not smart enough to make money. They called me a secretary. But they didn't know whose name was really on the checks that kept this house running. And as the memory faded, bringing me back to the sterile lights of the airport terminal, a bitter realization rose in my throat. I had paid for the heart that was currently beating in my father's chest, the same heart that had no room for me. People always say that you can't put a price on family, but in the Holden household, family had a very specific price tag. And 2 years ago, I found out exactly how much it cost to keep my father alive. It was a Tuesday when Dad's chest tightened like a vice. The doctors called it a widowmaker heart attack, massive blockage, immediate danger. By the time I got the call via a satellite phone in a dusty command tent in Syria, he was already being wheeled into surgery for an emergency triple bypass. I was 7,000 miles away. I couldn't hold his hand. I couldn't drive Mom to the hospital. But I could do the one thing I was always good for. I could pay. See, my parents' health insurance was like their lifestyle, flashy on the surface, but full of holes underneath. They had a high-deductible plan that barely covered a routine checkup, let alone open-heart surgery. And the specialized cardiac surgeon? He was out of network. The hospital wanted a massive deposit to proceed with the best care options, or they were going to stabilize him and transfer him to a lower-tier county facility. That wasn't an option. Not for Frank Holden. Image was everything. While I was frantically coordinating with the hospital billing department over a choppy connection, my brother Ethan was busy too. He was on Facebook. I saw the screenshots later. Ethan had posted a photo of Dad intubated in the ICU, a violation of privacy that made my stomach turn, with a long, tear-jerking caption about his hero fighting for life. And at the bottom of the post, there was a link, a GoFundMe page. Help the Holdens' heart heal, it said. Goal, $20,000. The donations poured in. Friends, neighbors, distant cousins, they all chipped in, moved by Ethan's poetic plea for help. But the hospital billing department never saw a dime of that GoFundMe money. We need the wire transfer within 24 hours, Ms. Holden, the billing administrator told me, her voice devoid of sympathy. Or we can't guarantee the private recovery suite. I didn't hesitate. I logged into my USAA military banking app. I looked at the balance I had been building for 5 years. It wasn't just savings, it was my hazard pay. Every dollar in that account represented a day I'd woken up in a combat zone not knowing if I'd go to sleep that night. It was blood money. It was supposed to be my down payment on a small house, a quiet life, maybe a dog. I typed in the numbers, $50,000. I hit transfer. My savings evaporated in a single click. Gone. Sent to a hospital in California to save a man who had just told me I wasn't smart enough to be an entrepreneur. A week later, I managed to get emergency leave. I flew straight to the hospital. When I walked into the recovery room, the air smelled of antiseptic and expensive floral arrangements. Dad was sitting up, pale but smiling. Mom was fluttering around him, adjusting his pillows. Ethan was leaning against the windowsill, looking tired but heroic. There she is, Dad rasped. The traveler returns. Hi, Dad, I said, dropping my bag. How are you feeling? Like $1,000,000, he said, patting Mom's hand. Or 50,000, I guess. I froze. He knew. We were so worried about the bills, Mom gushed, tears welling up in her eyes. She turned and wrapped her arms around Ethan, squeezing him tight. But your brother. Oh, thank God for your brother. He took care of everything. He told us not to worry about a thing. I stared at them. My mouth fell open slightly. I looked at Ethan. Surely he would correct her. Surely he would say, "Actually, Mom, Olive wired the 50 grand. The GoFundMe money is just sitting in my account." Ethan looked at me. His eyes were flat, unreadable behind his stylish glasses. He didn't flinch. He just smiled, a humble, martyr-like smile, and shrugged. "Family is everything, Mom," Ethan said softly. "I did what I had to do. I invested the community donations into that crypto project I told you about. It's going to double by next year, and then we'll have a real safety net. But I made sure the hospital got paid now." He was lying. He was lying right to their faces, and he was stealing my sacrifice to polish his own halo. "Ethan," I said, my voice sharp, "you didn't pay the hospital." The room went silent. The steady beep of the heart monitor seemed to get louder. "What?" Mom snapped, pulling away from Ethan. "What are you talking about?" "I wired the $50,000, I said, my hands balling into fists at my sides. "From my USAA account. Tuesday morning, that was my hazard pay from Syria." Ethan kept the donation money. I expected shock. I expected Mom to turn on Ethan and demand the truth. Instead, Mom's face hardened. She looked at me with a mixture of annoyance and disappointment. "Olive, stop it," she hissed. "Stop what? Telling the truth?" "Stop keeping score," she said, waving her hand as if swatting away a fly. "This is not the time to be petty. Your father just had heart surgery. Who cares which account the money came from? It's all family money in the end." She stepped between me and Ethan, physically shielding him from my accusation. "Your brother stepped up. He organized the community. He was here. You were halfway around the world playing soldier. Don't come in here and try to tarnish his moment just because you're jealous." Jealous. The word hung in the air like toxic smoke. I had drained my life savings to save her husband, and she was calling me jealous of the son who was currently embezzling charity funds to gamble on cryptocurrency. I looked at Dad. "Dad!" He wouldn't meet my eyes. He just fiddled with the remote control for the TV. "Your mother is right, Olive. Don't cause a scene. We're just glad the bill is paid." That was the moment something inside me fractured. It wasn't a loud break. It was a quiet hairline crack in the foundation of my loyalty. I realized then that to them, I wasn't a person. I was a resource. I was an ATM machine that they could kick when it didn't dispense cash fast enough and ignore when it did. I know I'm not the only one who has felt this sting. If you have ever been the financial backbone of your family while someone else got all the praise, please hit that like button right now. And in the comments, just type, "I paid," so I know I'm not alone in this. I looked at the three of them, the perfect family unit. "Okay," I said quietly. "I won't cause a scene." I walked out of the hospital room. I walked all the way to the parking lot, sat in my rental car, and screamed until my throat tasted like blood. But the worst part wasn't the anger. The worst part was the question that kept echoing in my head, louder than the scream. Why do I still do it? Why do I still send them money every month? I needed to find an answer. And I knew the only place I could think clearly wasn't in this town. It was back in my small, lonely apartment, inside a metal box I kept hidden in my closet. My apartment, located just 10 miles from the base, is a fortress of silence. It is the complete antithesis of my parents' house in Bakersfield. There are no velvet drapes, no cabinets filled with china that no one is allowed to touch, and no staged family photos where I am conveniently cropped out. Here, the walls are painted a clean, clinical white. The furniture is functional. A leather armchair for reading, a simple bed frame, and a desk. The only decoration in the living room is a gym corner that looks more like a torture chamber than a workout space. There are heavy kettlebells, a pull-up bar mounted into the studs of the wall, and a rowing machine that has absorbed gallons of my sweat. On the wall facing the rowing machine, taped up with blue painter's tape, is a poster of David Goggins. His face is streaked with grime, eyes intense, staring right through me. Below him is the quote that gets me out of bed at 04:00 a.m. every single day. When you think you're done, you're only at 40% of your body's capability. This apartment is my sanctuary. It is the only place in the world where I don't have to apologize for taking up space. I walked into the bedroom and knelt down. I reached under the bed and pulled out an old, rusted ammunition box. The metal was cold against my fingertips. I ran my thumb over the latch, feeling the grit that had settled into the grooves. Sand from Iraq, dust from Syria. This box didn't hold bullets. It held something far more volatile. The truth. I popped the latch. Inside were dozens of letters. Some were written on official military stationery, others on the backs of MRE cardboard sleeves or crumpled notebook paper. None of them had stamps. None of them had ever seen the inside of a mailbox. I picked up one from near the bottom of the stack. The paper was yellowing, the ink slightly smeared where a drop of sweat, or maybe a tear, had landed years ago. Dear Mom and Dad, the letter began. Today we lost Jenkins. The Humvee in front of mine hit an IED. The sound was so loud it felt like my teeth shattered. I'm scared. I don't know if I'm going to make it home this time. I just wanted to say I love you. I stared at the words. I remembered writing them by the light of a red tactical flashlight, my hand shaking so hard I could barely hold the pen. I put it down and picked up another, dated 3 years later. Dear Mom, I made Major today. They pinned the gold oak leaf on my collar. My commander said I'm the best logistical strategist he's ever seen. I wish you could have been there. I have never sent these letters. For a long time, I told myself it was because I didn't want to worry them. I told myself I was protecting them from the harsh realities of my world. But that was a lie. I didn't send them because I knew they wouldn't care. I learned that lesson the hard way 5 years ago. I had just been awarded the Bronze Star for meritorious service in a combat zone. It was the proudest moment of my life. I was bursting with it. I needed to share it with someone, anyone. So, I took a picture of the medal, the beautiful bronze star suspended from the red, white, and blue ribbon. And I texted it to my mother. Mom, look. I got the bronze star today. I waited. I stared at my phone for hours, watching the 3 little dots appear and disappear. Finally, her response came through. That's nice, honey. But are you eating enough? You look thin in your profile picture. Also, Ethan's wife just announced she's pregnant again. Maybe you should look at her life and learn what real happiness looks like. A medal won't keep you warm at night. That text message killed something inside me. It wasn't a loud death. It was quiet, like a candle being snuffed out in a storm. I realized then that to Margaret and Frank Holden, my rank, my sacrifices, and my honors were invisible. They didn't fit the narrative. They didn't want a warrior daughter. They wanted a wife, a mother, a prop for their Christmas cards. I placed the letters back into the ammo box and snapped the latch shut. The sound echoed in the empty room like a gunshot. I stood up and walked to the closet. Inside, hanging in a protective plastic bag, was my service dress uniform. I unzipped the bag. The dark blue fabric was immaculate, lint-free, sharp enough to cut glass. I took the jacket off the hanger and slipped my arms into it. The transformation was immediate. As I buttoned the silver buttons, my posture shifted. My spine straightened. The slump of the disappointing daughter vanished, replaced by the rigid bearing of a colonel. I adjusted the collar. I smoothed the lapels. I looked at myself in the full-length mirror on the door. On my left chest sat a rack of colorful ribbons, rows and rows of them. Each one told a story. The Bronze Star, the Meritorious Service Medal, the campaign medals. They were a kaleidoscope of pain, victory, loss, and survival. And on my shoulders, resting heavily on the epaulets, were the silver eagles. The insignia of a full-bird colonel. I stared into my own eyes in the mirror. You are not a maid, I whispered to the reflection. You are not a failure. You are Colonel Olive Holden. You lead men and women into the fire, and you bring them home. For a moment, in the silence of my sanctuary, I allowed myself to feel the weight of my own worth. I didn't need Frank to tell me I was smart. I didn't need Margaret to tell me I was pretty. I didn't need Ethan to tell me I was successful. The United States Air Force had already told me who I was. But the moment couldn't last. I looked at the clock. I had to pack. I had a flight to catch. I had a wedding to attend. Not as a guest of honor, but as unpaid help. Slowly, reluctantly, I unbuttoned the jacket. I took off the armor of the colonel and slipped back into the gray hoodie and jeans. I watched the powerful woman fade away in the mirror, replaced once again by the homeless-looking sister. But this time, it was different. Underneath the hoodie, the skin was thicker. The mind was calloused. I knew something they didn't. I knew what was hanging in my closet, and I knew that sooner or later, the rest of the world would see it too. I grabbed my duffel bag. It was time to go to the wedding. It was time to be humiliated one last time before the end. If you really want to know where you rank in your family hierarchy, don't look at the Christmas card. Wait for a wedding. 6 months before the airport incident, my cousin Jessica got married at a vineyard in Napa Valley. It was a rustic, chic affair, which is just code for spending $50,000 to make a barn look like it wasn't full of hay. I wasn't in the wedding party. Jessica had 6 bridesmaids, all wearing matching dusty rose gowns, sipping mimosas in the bridal suite since 10 in the morning. I, on the other hand, was wearing black slacks and a black polo shirt. I looked less like a family member and more like the catering staff. That was by design. Olive honey, my mother had said 2 days prior. Since you're not, in the photos and you're so good at logistics, we volunteered you to help the coordinator. You're used to waking up early, right? So, while Ethan was sleeping off a hangover in his hotel suite, I was out on the lawn at 07 a.m., unloading 200 white folding chairs from a delivery truck. I set them up with military precision. Perfect rows, perfect angles. I treated that lawn like a drill deck. By noon, sweat was sticking my shirt to my back. My hands were covered in dust. I retreated behind the main reception tent to chug a bottle of water and catch my breath in the shade. That's when I heard them. My mother's voice carries. It has a piercing quality, especially when she's gossiping. She was standing just on the other side of the canvas wall with my Aunt Linda and Aunt Carol. It's a shame Olive isn't a bridesmaid, Aunt Linda said. Her voice was dripping with that fake sympathy Southern women master so well. She's the only cousin left out. Oh, Linda, please, my mother scoffed. I could hear the clinking of ice in her glass. Look at the lineup. Jessica and her friends are petite, delicate. If I put Olive up there, she'd look like a Clydesdale among thoroughbreds. It would ruin the aesthetic. I froze. The water bottle crunched in my grip. Besides, Mom continued, lowering her voice to a conspiratorial whisper that was actually louder. Olive is rugged. She's hard. She's been in the desert too long with all those men. She doesn't know how to be soft anymore. Honestly, I told the planner to keep her on logistics. If she stands at the entrance greeting guests, people might think she's security. The aunts laughed. It was a light, tinkling sound that made my stomach turn. I stood there, staring at the white canvas. Rugged, hard, security. I looked at my hands. They were strong hands. They had saved lives. They had built shelters. They had held dying men. But to my mother, they were just ugly tools to be hidden in the back room. I didn't confront them. I didn't storm out. I simply crushed the empty water bottle, tossed it in the trash, and went back to work. I directed the valet parking. I showed guests to their seats. I became exactly what they wanted, invisible machinery. The reception that night was a blur of noise and excess. The open bar was the center of gravity, and orbiting closest to it was Ethan. My brother was in rare form. He was wearing a tuxedo that cost more than my first car, holding court with a group of bridesmaids who didn't know his credit cards were maxed out. He was loud, expansive, and already 3 drinks past his limit. I was standing near the kitchen entrance, making sure the servers had a clear path, when the music softened for the speeches. Ethan, deciding he needed to be part of the moment, stumbled over to where Jessica, the bride, was standing. She looked radiant in a custom Vera Wang gown that shimmered under the string lights. Jess, Ethan slurred, waving a full glass of Cabernet Sauvignon like a conductor's baton. You look expensive. He lunged forward for a hug. He tripped over a microphone cord. It happened in slow motion. The glass left his hand. The dark red liquid arched through the air like a slash of blood. Splash. The silence was instantaneous. The red wine hit Jessica's pristine white bodice and cascaded down the skirt. It looked like a gunshot wound. Jessica gasped, her hands flying to her mouth. The music cut out. 200 guests stared in horror. Ethan scrambled to regain his balance. He looked at the stain, then at the shocked faces. Panic flashed in his eyes. He needed a scapegoat. He needed a fixer. His eyes locked on me in the shadows. Olive, he shouted, his voice cracking with desperate authority. Olive, get over here. Bring a towel. I stepped out of the shadows. Don't just stand there, Ethan yelled, pointing a shaking finger at the stain he had caused. Fix it. You know how to clean up messes. You're used to this menial stuff. Get on your knees and scrub it out before it sets. My mother rushed forward, not to scold Ethan, but to reinforce his command. Olive, hurry, do something. Don't let your brother look bad. The injustice of it hit me so hard I felt dizzy. Don't let him look bad. He had just ruined a $5,000 dress, and I was being ordered to clean it up like a servant because I was the rugged one. I looked at Ethan. He was sweating, pathetic, hiding behind his big sister one more time. I looked at Jessica. She was crying silently, paralyzed. I walked over. Not for Ethan, not for Mom, but for the bride. I grabbed a bottle of club soda from the bar and a clean white napkin. I walked up to Jessica and knelt on the grass. It's okay, I whispered to her. I've got it. I dabbed the stain. I focused on the fabric, ignoring the hundreds of eyes boring into my back. I ignored Ethan, who was now loudly explaining to the groom that it was an accident and Olive has it handled. As I knelt there in the dirt, scrubbing wine out of silk, I looked up. I saw my mother patting Ethan on the back, comforting him. I saw my father shaking his head at me as if I hadn't moved fast enough. And right then, amidst the smell of wine and expensive perfume, I heard a sound that no one else could hear. Snap! It was the sound of the final tether breaking. The invisible cord that had bound me to their approval, their love, their toxic orbit. It snapped clean in two. I finished cleaning the dress. It wasn't perfect, but it was better. I stood up. My knees were stained with grass. Thank you, Olive, Jessica whispered, gripping my hand. You're welcome, I said. I turned to my family. Ethan was already laughing again, retelling the story as if he were the victim of a clumsy glass. Mom was smiling. I didn't say a word. I turned around and walked away. I walked past the open bar, past the valet stand, and out of the venue gate. I walked into the dark, quiet road. I needed silence. I needed to wash the noise of their hypocrisy out of my ears. I kept walking until I saw the steeple of a small, old chapel in the distance. I walked until the bass-heavy music of the wedding reception was nothing but a dull throb in the distance. I walked until the gravel road turned into cracked pavement and the vineyards gave way to the small, sleepy town that bordered the estate. My knees were still damp with club soda and red wine. My hands, usually steady enough to defuse ordnance, were trembling. Not from fear, but from a rage so cold it felt like hypothermia. I didn't know where I was going until I saw the steeple. It was a small white clapboard chapel, the kind you see on postcards of rural America. The sign out front read, St. Jude's, open to all. St. Jude, the patron saint of lost causes. It felt appropriate. I pushed open the heavy oak doors. The air inside was cool and smelled of beeswax, old hymnals, and silence. It was the kind of silence you can feel pressing against your eardrums. I walked down the center aisle, my sneakers squeaking faintly on the hardwood, and slid into the very last pew. I didn't kneel. I didn't pray. I just sat there, staring at the simple wooden cross at the front of the altar, trying to regulate my breathing. In, out, just like they taught us in SEER school. You sit like you're expecting an ambush, daughter. The voice startled me. It was gravelly, worn down by time, but it had a steel core. I turned. An old man was shuffling out from the sacristy, carrying a polishing rag. He must have been in his 90s. He moved with a heavy limp, leaning on a cane, but his back was ramrod straight. He wore a simple clerical collar, but pinned to his suspenders was a tiny, faded lapel pin, a parachute with wings. I stood up instinctively. I'm sorry, Reverend. I didn't know anyone was here. I can leave. Sit, he commanded. It wasn't a request. It was an order. I sat. He limped over and sat in the pew directly across the aisle from me. He looked me up and down, his watery blue eyes scanning me with a precision I recognized. He wasn't looking at my stained clothes. He was looking at my posture, the set of my jaw, the way my hands rested ready on my knees. Army, he asked. Air Force, sir, I replied. Special tactics. He nodded slowly, a small smile touching his thin lips. 82nd Airborne, Normandy, 1944. I know a soldier when I see one. We carry the weight differently than civilians. He leaned forward, resting his chin on his cane. So, Colonel, I'm guessing you're an officer by the way you hold your head? Why are you sitting in my church looking like you just lost a war? I looked away. I wanted to tell him it was nothing. I wanted to say it was just family drama. But something about his gaze, forged in a war 70 years ago, made lying impossible. I feel like I'm fighting on the wrong side, I whispered. I give them everything. My money, my time, my dignity. And they look at me like I'm nothing. Like I'm a servant. The old pastor nodded, as if he had heard this story 1,000 times before. Family? Yes. And let me guess, he rasped. You think if you just serve them a little more, if you just sacrifice a little more, they'll finally see you? They'll finally salute you? I just want them to respect me, I said, my voice cracking. I command respect from generals. Why can't I get it from my own brother? The old man sighed. He pointed a gnarled finger at the Bible resting on the pew between us. Open it, he said. Matthew, chapter 13, verse 57. I hesitated, then reached for the book. The pages were thin and crinkled. I found the verse. A prophet is not without honor, save in his own country and in his own house. I read it twice. The words seemed to vibrate on the page. Do you know what that means, soldier? The pastor asked softly. I shook my head. It means that the people who watched you grow up, who changed your diapers, who knew you before you became who you are, they are often the last ones to see your greatness, he said. His voice grew stronger, filling the empty space. To the world, you are a lion, a warrior, a protector. But to your own house, you are just Olive. You are familiar. And familiarity breeds contempt. He tapped his cane on the floor for emphasis. God gave you the heart of a lion, daughter. He gave you claws and teeth and a roar that can shake the mountains. So why, in God's name, do you keep insisting on living like a mouse just to please a clouder of house cats? A mouse among house cats. The image hit me hard. That's exactly what I'd been doing. I'd been shrinking myself. I'd been dimming my light so it wouldn't shine too brightly in Ethan's eyes. I'd been accepting the scraps from the table because I was afraid of losing my seat at it. I thought it was my duty, I said. They're my blood. Blood is biology, the old man said, standing up with a groan. Loyalty is a choice. Respect is earned. And if they cannot respect the colonel, they do not deserve the sister. He looked at me one last time. Stop waiting for them to give you honor. They don't have it to give. You have to take it. He turned and limped back toward the altar, disappearing into the shadows, leaving me alone with the silence. But the silence wasn't heavy anymore. It was clarifying. I sat there for a long time, watching the dust motes dance in the light of the stained glass window. The numbness that had paralyzed me at the wedding was gone. The sadness was gone. In its place was something cold, hard, and incredibly sharp. I realized I had been fighting the wrong battle. I had been trying to win their love through submission. But you don't negotiate with terrorists, And you don't beg for respect from narcissists. I thought about the upcoming family trip to Hawaii. Ethan had booked it, using my credit card points, of course, as a healing retreat for the family. I'd been dreading it. I'd planned to go along, carry the bags, pay for the dinners, and smile while they insulted me. No more. I know so many of you listening right now have felt this exact moment. That moment when you realize you've been lighting yourself on fire just to keep others warm. If you are done being the mouse in your family, I need you to hit that like button right now. And in the comments, I want you to write just one word: respect. Let's show the world that we are done begging for what we deserve. I stood up. My legs felt strong. I wasn't going to cancel the Hawaii trip. Oh no, I was going to go. But I wasn't going as Olive the maid. I wasn't going as Olive the sister. I was going as Colonel Holden. I was going to give them exactly what they wanted: a family vacation they would never, ever forget. I would let them see the truth. I would let them see the lion. And then, when the dust settled, I would walk away forever. I pushed open the church doors and stepped back out into the night. The air was cool on my face. I pulled my phone out of my pocket. It was buzzing with texts from Mom, asking where I was and demanding I come back to help clean up. I deleted the thread. I had a mission to plan. The smell of beeswax and the silence of the old chapel evaporated, replaced instantly by the sensory assault of Los Angeles International Airport. I was back in the present, back in the noise, back in the nightmare. The overhead speakers blared an automated announcement about unattended baggage, but it was barely audible over the din of thousands of travelers shuffling, complaining, and rushing. I stood in the middle of the Tom Bradley International Terminal, gripping the handles of the suitcases until my knuckles turned white. My family, if I could still call them that, had already made their move. Because they held first-class tickets, purchased with points that Ethan had borrowed from my account years ago and never repaid, they breezed toward the priority screening lane. It was a red carpet of travel, short, efficient, and guarded by a smiling agent who unhooked the velvet rope for them as if they were royalty. I, holding my crumpled economy ticket for seat 37B, was relegated to the general boarding lanes. It was a cattle call. The line snaked back and forth across the terminal floor in an endless maze of retractable belt barriers. It was filled with tired parents wrangling screaming toddlers, backpackers sleeping on their luggage, and people like me, exhausted, invisible, and waiting. I inched forward, kicking my heavy duffel bag along the floor with my boot. The line moved with the speed of a glacier. To my left, separated only by a panel of plexiglass, was the priority area. Ethan had already cleared the initial document check, but instead of moving toward the X-ray machines, he stopped. He actually stopped and leaned against the glass partition, waiting for me to catch up on my side of the wall. He took off his sunglasses, hooking them into the V-neck of his designer t-shirt. He looked at me, trapped in the crush of the general population, and grinned. It was the grin of a man who believes he has won the lottery of life. "Hang in there, sis," he shouted through the gap between the glass panels. His voice was loud enough to turn heads in both lines. "Don't miss the flight. You know they don't hold the plane for economy passengers. The back of the bus waits for no one." A few people in my line chuckled nervously. Most just looked annoyed. I didn't respond. I just stared at him, my face a mask of stone. My mother and father were standing just behind him. Mom was fussing with the zipper of her Louis Vuitton bag, acting as if the air in the priority lane was cleaner than the air I was breathing. She looked up and saw me standing there, looking back at her. I saw a flicker of something in her eyes. Not guilt, not pity, but shame. Shame that I was associated with her. She leaned in close to my father, but she didn't whisper. Margaret Holden never whispers when she wants to make a point. "Frank, turn around," she said, her voice cutting through the ambient noise like a serrated knife. "Don't wave at her. Don't acknowledge her." "Margaret, she's our daughter," Dad muttered, though he obediently turned his back. "Look at her, Frank," Mom hissed, gesturing vaguely in my direction without making eye contact. "She looks like a vagrant. That hoodie is filthy. If people see us waving, they'll think we're traveling with the help. Or worse, it's embarrassing. Just pretend you don't know her until we get to Hawaii and I can force her into a dress. Pretend you don't know her. The words hung in the air. The couple standing in front of me, a nice-looking pair of tourists in matching windbreakers, turned to look at me. The woman's eyes softened with pity. She looked at my worn-out clothes, my messy ponytail, and then at the well-dressed woman who had just disowned me. "I'm sorry, honey," the woman whispered to me, shaking her head. "That's awful." I looked at the stranger. "It's okay," I said softly. "She's right. She doesn't know me." And it was the truth. She didn't know me. She knew a ghost. She knew a doormat. She didn't know the colonel. The line shuffled forward. I was next. I stepped up to the TSA podium. The agent sitting behind the high desk was a man in his 50s, heavy-set, with dark circles under his eyes that spoke of double shifts and mandatory overtime. He didn't look up. He just held out a gloved hand. "ID and boarding pass," he droned. It was a script he had repeated 10,000 times. Behind me, the line pressed in, impatient. To my left, Ethan and my parents were still watching, waiting to see me fumble, waiting to see me endure the indignity of the commoner's search. They expected me to pull out my California driver's license. They expected me to take off my shoes, take out my laptop, and shuffle through the scanner in my socks like everyone else. I reached into the front pocket of my hoodie. My hand brushed past the loose change. It brushed past the crumpled tissue. It found the slim, black leather wallet that I usually kept deep inside my tactical gear. I pulled it out. The movement caught the TSA agent's eye. He looked up, expecting a standard plastic license. Instead, I flipped the wallet open. I slid out a white card. It wasn't a driver's license. It wasn't a passport card. It was a KCC, a common access card. But this wasn't the standard ID issued to fresh recruits or contractors. This one had a thick, vertical color bar denoting senior officer rank. And embedded in the plastic was a gold computer chip that gleamed under the harsh fluorescent lights of the terminal. It was the key to the kingdom. It was a card that said, I answered to the President of the United States, not to Margaret Holden. I didn't hand it to the agent. I didn't slide it across the desk submissively. I placed it firmly on the scanner glass with a sharp thud. The sound was quiet, but to me, it sounded like a gavel coming down in a courtroom. The TSA agent blinked. He looked at the card. He looked at the gold chip. Then his eyes snapped up to my face. He looked at the hoodie. He looked at the ponytail. And then he looked back at the card, trying to reconcile the two images. His posture changed instantly. The boredom vanished, replaced by a sudden, electric alertness. He opened his mouth to speak, to ask the question that was forming on his lips. I leaned in. I rested my forearms on the podium, bringing my face level with his. I didn't smile. My eyes were cold, hard, and absolutely terrifying. "Scan it," I commanded. It wasn't a request. It was an order given with the full weight of 20 years of command behind it. "Scan it," I repeated, my voice dropping an octave, "and watch the screen." The agent swallowed hard. His hand trembled slightly as he reached for his scanner gun. To my left, Ethan was still laughing at something Dad had said. They had no idea that the ground beneath their feet was about to open up. They had no idea that the vagrant in the economy line had just pulled the pin on a grenade. The agent pulled the trigger on the scanner. A red laser beam washed over the barcode on my ID. Beep. For a split second, there was silence. And then, all hell broke loose. The red laser beam hit the gold chip embedded in my common access card. In a normal world, for a normal passenger, the machine would have let out a polite, high-pitched beep to signal approval. But my card wasn't normal. It was keyed to the Department of Defense's highest tier of operational security. It was designed to trigger immediate, override-level protocols at any federal checkpoint. The machine didn't beep. Instead, it let out a low, oscillating thrum, a sound like a heavy bass drop that vibrated in the floorboards. Rum, rum, rum. The small LCD screen on the podium, which usually displayed a green check mark, suddenly flashed a violent, pulsating crimson. Text scrolled across it in bold, capitalized block letters that were visible even to the people standing 5 feet away. Critical alert, level 5 clearance detected. USAF Colonel, Special Operations, Protocol, Code Red. The reaction was instantaneous. It was kinetic. Code Red, we have a Code Red at Checkpoint 4. The agent behind the podium shouted, his voice cracking with adrenaline. He slammed his hand onto a panic button under the desk. Overhead, amber strobe lights began to flash. The terminal, which had been a sea of bored, shuffling travelers just seconds ago, erupted into chaos. Back! Everybody back! Screamed a female TSA agent from the neighboring lane. She threw her arms out, physically shoving a businessman backward. From the periphery of the security checkpoint, the response team materialized. 6 TSA officers abandoned their posts and sprinted toward me. Behind them, 2 airport police officers armed with AR-15 tactical rifles pushed through the crowd, their heavy boots thudding against the linoleum floor. Clear the lane! Clear the lane now! One of the officers bellowed. The crowd gasped and scrambled backward, knocking over stanchions and luggage. To my left, behind the plexiglass of the priority lane, my family was watching the scene unfold. But they didn't see a security clearance. They didn't understand the protocol. They only saw the flashing red lights, the shouting agents, and the guns rushing toward their vagrant daughter. Ethan's face went white. He looked like a deer staring down the headlights of a semi-truck. In his mind, there was only one explanation. I was a criminal. I was a fraud. I had been caught doing something illegal, and I was about to drag him down with me. She's crazy! Ethan shrieked, his voice shrill and panicked. I don't know her. I swear, officer, I don't know her. He backed away so fast that he tripped over his own feet. The venti Starbucks latte in his hand, an iced caramel macchiato that cost $7, went flying. Smash! The plastic cup hit the floor. Coffee, milk, and ice cubes exploded across the pristine tiles of the priority lane, splattering onto my mother's Louis Vuitton bag. Ethan! Mom screamed, but she wasn't looking at the mess. She was looking at the police officers who were now surrounding me. She grabbed Dad's arm and pulled him back. Frank, don't look. She must have a bomb, or drugs. Oh my God, the scandal. I stood in the center of the storm. I didn't move. I didn't flinch. I kept my hands visible, resting on the podium, perfectly calm. I was the eye of the hurricane. The armed officers formed a perimeter around me, facing outward, pushing the crowd back to create a 20-foot buffer zone. They weren't arresting me. They were securing the asset. Then the crowd parted. A man walked through the chaos. He was massive, wearing a white shirt with 3 gold bars on the shoulder boards, the lead TSA supervisor. He moved with a purpose that silenced the room. He walked straight past the trembling agent at the podium. He walked straight past the armed guards. He stopped 2 feet in front of me. The terminal went deathly silent. Even the crying babies seemed to hold their breath. Ethan was pressed against the glass, his mouth hanging open, waiting to see me tackled and handcuffed. The supervisor looked at the screen. He looked at my ID card. Then, he looked at me. He saw the posture. He saw the eyes. He recognized the authority that transcends clothing. He snapped his heels together. The sound was like a gunshot. He drew himself up to his full height, squared his shoulders, and raised his right hand in a crisp, perfect military salute. Good morning, Colonel Holden, he boomed, his voice carrying to the rafters. We were not informed of your travel schedule, ma'am. My apologies for the delay. The silence that followed was heavy enough to crush a tank. Colonel? I heard my father whisper. It was a weak, strangled sound. I slowly returned the salute, cutting the air with precision. At ease, supervisor. Thank you, ma'am. He lowered his hand, but kept his respectful stance. We have initiated VIP protocol. We have a secure transport vehicle waiting on the tarmac to take you to the military sector. You won't need to wait in this civilian line. He gestured disdainfully at the general boarding lane, and then, with even more disdain, at the priority lane where my family stood frozen. I picked up my CAC card and slid it back into my wallet. Thank you, I said coolly. I appreciate the efficiency. I turned my head slowly to the left. The scene in the priority lane was a masterpiece of devastation. Ethan was standing in a puddle of spilled coffee, his designer shoes soaked in sticky milk. His sunglasses were hanging lopsided from his shirt collar. His face was a mask of absolute, unadulterated shock. He looked at me, then at the supervisor, then back at me, his brain trying to process the impossibility of what he was seeing. Mom was clutching her purse to her chest, her eyes wide and terrified. She looked like she had seen a ghost. For the first time in her life, she looked small. Dad was just staring, his mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. I locked eyes with Ethan. I didn't smile. I didn't gloat. I looked at him with the cold, professional detachment of a commanding officer observing a messy latrine. "You missed a spot," I said, nodding at the coffee puddle at his feet. Then I turned back to the supervisor. "Get me out of here," I ordered. "I have a plane to catch." "Yes, Colonel. Right this way. Make a hole," the supervisor shouted to the crowd. The sea of people parted instantly. The armed guards fell into formation, flanking me on either side. I grabbed the handle of my battered duffel bag. I stood tall. I walked forward. I walked past the gaping tourists. I walked past the stunned TSA agents. And I walked right past the glass partition separating me from my family. I didn't look back at them. I didn't wave goodbye. I left them standing there in the wreckage of their own assumptions. 3 small, insignificant figures drowning in a puddle of spilled latte while I walked onto the tarmac where the real power lay. As the automatic doors slid open, hitting me with the smell of jet fuel and freedom, I felt lighter than I had in 20 years. The ghost was gone. The maid was gone. The colonel had arrived. To most people, the inside of a C-17 Globemaster is a nightmare. It is a cavernous, windowless metal tube that smells of hydraulic fluid, unwashed canvas, and jet fuel. It doesn't have reclining leather seats, hot towel service, or a menu with champagne options. It screams, vibrates, and rattles with the raw power of 4 massive turbofan engines. To me, it was a sanctuary. I sat on a red nylon web seat, strapped in against the fuselage wall. Across from me was a pallet of humanitarian aid supplies destined for the Pacific. My legs were stretched out, boots resting on the diamond plate floor. A young loadmaster, a kid no older than 22 with a grin that reminded me of my first years in the service, walked by. He handed me a small plastic cup and a miniature bottle of Jim Beam. "Compliments of the cockpit colonel," he shouted over the roar of the engines. "Pilot says thanks for the company." "Thank you, Sergeant," I shouted back, cracking the seal on the bourbon. I poured the amber liquid into the cup and took a slow sip. It burned pleasantly on the way down, a warm fire to chase away the cold chill of the airport terminal. I wasn't squeezed into a middle seat next to a bathroom. I wasn't listening to my mother complain about the legroom. I was flying in a multi-million-dollar aircraft, treated with absolute dignity. I reached into my pocket and pulled out my phone. We had reached cruising altitude, and the onboard military satellite Wi-Fi was strong. I turned the screen on. My notifications didn't just ding. The phone vibrated so hard in my hand it felt like it was having a seizure. I had missed 40 calls. There were hundreds of text messages, and my social media apps, which usually sat dormant, were exploding. I opened TikTok first. I didn't even have to search for it. The algorithm knew. The very first video on my For You page was a shaky, vertical clip filmed by someone standing in the general boarding line at LAX. The caption read, "POV, you try to shame a hoodie girl and find out she runs the whole damn military. Karma? Military, respect? Karen? Fafo." I pressed play. I watched the scene unfold from a stranger's perspective. I saw the back of my own head. I saw Ethan leaning against the glass, laughing, pointing at me. I heard his voice, clear as day. "The back of the bus waits for no one." Then the camera zoomed in on my mother, capturing her hiding her face and telling Dad to ignore me. The person filming added a text overlay. "Look at this entitlement." Then came the climax. The beep, the red lights, the code red flashing on the screen, the salute. The person filming had zoomed in perfectly on Ethan's face the moment the TSA supervisor saluted me. It was a masterpiece of comedic timing. You could actually pinpoint the second his soul left his body as he dropped his Starbucks cup. The video had been up for 2 hours. It had 5.2 million views. I scrolled down to the comments. There were 30,000 of them. Did you see his face? Bro dropped his latte like it was hot potato. The way that supervisor snapped to attention, chills. That girl isn't just a soldier, she's a boss. The mom trying to hide? Lady, we see you. We see your Louis Vuitton bag and your cheap attitude. I'm an Air Force vet. That's a full-bird colonel. Do you know how hard it is for a woman to get there? And her brother treated her like a bum. Disgusting. I took another sip of bourbon, a small smile playing on my lips. But the internet detectives weren't done. They never are. In the reply videos, someone had already found Ethan. Update on the latte guy, a user named Itish Internet Sleuth posted. His name is Ethan Holden. He claims to be a real estate mogul in Bakersfield. I looked up his LLC. It's a shell company for a multi-level marketing crypto scam. He has 3 lawsuits pending for unpaid contractor fees. Also, his investors are mostly just his parents' retirement fund. I switched over to Yelp. I searched for Holden Realty Group. Before today, Ethan had a 4.5-star rating, mostly from fake accounts he created himself. Now, it was a solid 1-star wasteland. Owner yells at veterans at airports, "Do not trust this man with your money." Scammer, liar, disrespectful. If he treats his own sister like that, imagine how he treats tenants. His brand, the one thing Ethan valued more than oxygen, was incinerated. He was canceled. In the span of a 2-hour flight, his golden boy image had been dragged through the digital mud, stomped on, and set on fire. My phone buzzed again. Text messages were pouring in like mortar fire. I opened the thread from Mom. "Olive, what have you done? People are staring at us in the first-class cabin. The flight attendant was whispering about us. Why didn't you tell them to upgrade us? You have a private plane. You left your mother to be humiliated." I scrolled past it. Not a word about my rank. Not a word about the apology I deserved. Just more demands. Just more me, me, me. Then, the text from Ethan. "Take it down. Now." "Olive, I'm serious. Call your TSA friends. Tell them to scrub the video. My phone won't stop ringing. Investors are pulling out. You are ruining my life. I'm going to sue you. You set me up. You wore that hoodie on purpose. Answer me, you butt-whack." I read the last message. You wore that hoodie on purpose. He was right. I did. But not for the trap. I wore it because it was comfortable. He was the one who built the trap out of his own arrogance. I just let him walk into it. I looked out the small porthole window. Below me, the Pacific Ocean was a vast, endless sheet of blue. We were approaching Hawaii. The islands were out there somewhere, waiting. I looked at the phone one last time. Ethan was typing again. The little bubbles were dancing, promising more venom, more excuses, more gaslighting. I didn't block him. Blocking him would be a reaction. It would show emotion. Instead, I pressed the power button on the side of the phone. I held it down. Slide 2, power off. I swiped my thumb across the screen. The digital chaos, the screaming texts, the viral fame, the family drama. It all swirled into a tiny white dot in the center of the black glass, and then vanished. The screen went dark. I tossed the phone into my duffel bag and zipped it shut. I took the last sip of my bourbon, feeling the warmth spread through my chest. The noise of the engines was loud, deafening even, but inside my head it had never been quieter. They were in a metal tube somewhere behind me, trapped with their anger and their shrinking world. I was flying ahead, toward the sun. I closed my eyes and leaned my head back against the cargo netting. I slept soundly for the rest of the flight, the first dreamless sleep I had enjoyed in years. The sun was beginning its slow, golden descent into the Pacific Ocean, painting the sky over Waikiki Beach in bruised shades of purple and burnt orange. I was sitting at a high-top table at an open-air bar, The kind where the floor is made of sand and a guy in the corner is playing a slack key guitar cover of Over the Rainbow. In front of me sat a Mai Tai. It was the expensive kind. Fresh pineapple juice, dark rum floating on top, a wedge of lime on the rim, and a little paper umbrella that bobbed in the trade winds. It was the first drink I'd ordered in 20 years that I didn't feel guilty about buying. I took a sip, letting the sweetness mix with the bite of the alcohol. I closed my eyes, listening to the rhythmic crash of the waves just 50 yards away. For the first time since I boarded that C-17, my phone was on. But it was on silent. I hadn't checked my texts. I hadn't checked my email. I was just existing. There she is. I told you she'd be at the expensive place. The voice cut through the Hawaiian breeze like a chainsaw. My stomach dropped. I didn't have to turn around to know who it was. The wine, the entitlement, the desperation. It could only be Ethan. I opened my eyes and sighed, setting my glass down on the coaster. They came marching across the sand like an invading army of dysfunction. Ethan was leading the charge, wearing a floral shirt that still had the creases from the packaging. Behind him, Mom and Dad trudged through the sand in dress shoes, looking sweaty, miserable, and entirely out of place in paradise. But Ethan wasn't just walking toward me. He was walking with his arm extended, holding a tripod with his iPhone mounted on top. The ring light was on. He was live streaming. "Guys, look!" Ethan shouted at his phone screen, flashing a manic, terrifying smile. "I found her, the prodigal sister. We're all here. The Holden family reunion is happening live." He reached my table and shoved the camera into my face. "Say hi to the stream, Olive," he hissed through his teeth, his eyes pleading with me to play along. "Tell everyone we're good. Tell them it was all a big misunderstanding." I looked at him. I looked at the dark circles under his eyes, the desperation in his sweat. He was drowning. The internet had destroyed his reputation, his business, and his ego. And now, he was trying to use me as a life raft. Mom and Dad pulled up chairs without asking. They sat down heavily. Dad immediately waved a waiter over. "We'll take a bottle of your best Chardonnay," Dad ordered, puffing out his chest. "And 3 orders of the lobster tail and filet mignon, surf and turf. The big ones." He looked at me and winked. "We're celebrating, right, Olive? Family is back together." They honestly thought nothing had changed. They thought that because I was sitting there, the ATM was open for business. They thought they could order $200 worth of food, have me pay for it, and then use my face on a live stream to rehabilitate their image. "Olive," Mom said, reaching across the table to grab my hand. Her palm was clammy. "Your brother has been so worried. Look at him. He's been crying all day. He knows he made a mistake at the airport, but we're family. Blood is thicker than water, right? You can't just throw us away over a silly misunderstanding." Ethan moved the camera closer, framing us in a tight shot. He adopted a somber, tragic expression for his audience. "I am so sorry, sis," Ethan said, his voice trembling with a practiced theatricality. "I love you. We all love you. Please, just tell everyone that you forgive me. Tell them to stop the hate. We're blood." I looked at the chat scrolling rapidly on his screen. I saw the comments flying by. "She looks done with you, bro." "Is that the mom? She looks fake." "Don't do it, Colonel." I slowly pulled my hand away from my mother's grip. I picked up my napkin and wiped the spot where she had touched me. "Blood is thicker than water," I repeated softly. "Exactly," Dad beamed, tucking a napkin into his shirt collar. "That's my girl." "But the full quote," I continued, my voice hardening, is, "The blood of the covenant is thicker than the water of the womb. It means the bonds we choose are stronger than the ones we inherit." The smile froze on Dad's face. Ethan's eye twitched. "Olive, don't start," Mom warned, her voice dropping to that dangerous whisper. "Not on camera. Don't be selfish." I stood up. I towered over them. For years, I had made myself small so they could feel big. I had hunched my shoulders, worn baggy clothes, and kept my mouth shut. But now, standing in the glow of the sunset, I stood at my full height. I looked directly into the lens of Ethan's iPhone. I didn't look at him. I looked at the thousands of strangers watching this train wreck. "You want the truth?" I asked the camera. "Olive, no." Ethan panicked, trying to pull the phone away, but he was too slow. These people, I said, gesturing to the 3 frozen figures at the table, are not my family. They share my DNA, yes. But a tapeworm shares your DNA once it's inside you. That doesn't make it family. Olive, Mom shrieked, looking around to see if other diners were watching. I leaned in closer to the lens, my voice calm, cold, and final. You are parasites, I said. You have fed on my money, my energy, and my self-worth for 20 years. You thought I was a host that would never run dry. But the host is dead. And the parasites are going to have to learn how to survive on their own. You ungrateful, Dad sputtered, his face turning purple. The lobster looks great, I said, glancing at the waiter who was approaching with the wine bucket. I hope you enjoy it. I reached into the back pocket of my jeans. I pulled out my wallet, the same black wallet that held the card that had set me free. I opened it and pulled out a single, crisp $20 bill. I slapped the bill onto the table. It landed right in front of Ethan. That's for my Mai Tai, I said, and a generous tip for the server. Wait, you're not paying for dinner, Mom gasped, her eyes bulging. This is a $300 meal. We can't afford this. I know, I said. Better start washing dishes. Olive, you can't leave, Ethan screamed, grabbing my arm. The stream is still running. You're ruining everything. I looked at his hand on my arm. Then I looked at his eyes. Touch me again, I said quietly, and you'll find out exactly what they teach us in hand-to-hand combat training. Ethan snatched his hand back as if he had touched a hot stove. I turned around. The sun was just slipping below the horizon, sending a final flare of green light across the water. The air smelled of salt and freedom. I started walking. My boots sank slightly into the soft sand, but I didn't feel heavy. I felt weightless. Behind me, I could hear the chaos erupting. I heard Mom screeching at the waiter that they didn't want the wine. I heard Dad yelling at Ethan to turn the camera off. I heard Ethan sobbing, real tears this time, begging his followers to come back. I didn't turn my head. Not even an inch. I walked toward the water, where the waves were washing the sand clean, erasing the footprints of everything that had come before. I took a deep breath, filling my lungs with the Pacific air. I was alone. I had no family to go home to for Christmas. I had no one to buy gifts for. I had no one to call when I landed. And it was the most beautiful feeling in the world. I was Olive Holden. And for the first time in my life, I was free. Walking away from my family in Hawaii was the hardest mission I ever executed, but it was also the most necessary. Through this journey, I learned a lesson that I want to pass on to you. You teach people how to treat you. For years, I accepted their scraps because I thought that was all I was worth. But the moment I realized my own value, their power over me vanished. Please remember, setting boundaries is not an act of hate. It is the highest act of self-respect. You are the commanding officer of your own life. Do not let anyone, not even your own blood, demote you to a subordinate in your own story. Now, I want to hear from you. How many of you are holding onto a toxic relationship just because of history or obligation, even though it drains you dry every single day? If my story gave you even a spark of courage to finally stand up for yourself, please hit that like button right now. It helps this message reach others who are suffering in silence. And if you are ready to stop being the mouse and finally choose yourself, I want you to type one word in the comments: freedom. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more stories of justice and truth. I'll see you in the next mission. Dismissed.